All right. So before we get going, talking about the third essay in the research project, what I want to do is I want to just show you some registration stuff. Talk a little bit about next semester, when registration starts, and show you how you'll be able to get registered and everything.
Okay.
All right. So
How are you?
a
Hi.
couple just. Oh, sorry. I just muted people's microphones just because there was a little bit of feedback coming through, but just in case, just make sure you unmute yourself if you have any questions. Sorry, there was just one coming through with some feedback and I didn't know which one it was. So here we go. I think I can just unmute and then people should be able to unmute whenever they need to. So registration, then let me share my screen here and then you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about. So registration is getting ready to start pretty soon. And it's really going to depend on your registration priority on when you can be able to register. So here's our main page, right? And if we look through the main page, you can see that over here on upcoming dates and deadlines, if you just click here, it'll give you the list of dates and deadlines, right? And if you just scroll down, what you're gonna be able to see is that we're gonna be starting registration coming up pretty soon, right? So in November, we're gonna move into priority registration. So November 16th, you can see right here where it says spring priority registration begins, right? November 16th is if you have any of these priorities, if you're a veteran, if you're a DSP student, utilize EOPS, CalWORKs, etc., your registration will start November 16th. If you're a student athlete or part of Umoja or ASSC, your registration will be the 17th. And then from there, any continuing student, which is anyone who's enrolled in this class, your registration will be the 18th through the 23rd. So the way that you're going to figure out your registration priority is that all you have to do is you'll have to just log into My Solano. And then once you log into My Solano, and I'll just show you really quick. Once you log into My Solano, it'll give you a breakdown of what your registration priority is. So just go ahead and click here. I'll take myself to be able to log into My Solano and I'll show you what I mean. So I'm just going to click this and then it's going to take me here. I'm going to log into My Solano and mine should look just a little bit different than yours. But because I take sign language classes at Solano, I still have a student tab. So I'll be able to see that ours looks kind of the same here. Okay, so all you do is you click on your little student tab over here. And then when you click on the student tab, if you scroll down, you'll see right here, it says, when can I register? Underneath registration on the left-hand side. So all you have to do is click this, when can I register? And then you'll click the term. So we're going to click spring 2021, or sorry, 2021, and then click submit. And then it gives you the day that you're going to be able to register. So for me, because my registration priority is low, right? Meaning that I don't have a good registration priority because I'm not a returning student with a bunch of units, right? And they don't give people who work here high registration priority. It goes to students, right? So mine starts on December 4th. So I'm going to be allowed to register December 4th at 9:30 a.m. So everyone's is going to look different, and it depends on how long you've been a student at Solano. It depends on how many units you've taken. So all you would want to do is just check this, make sure you know ahead of time, and then whenever that day hits, that's when registration will open for you. Classes are going to fill up, depending on kind of like registration priority, right? They're first come, first serve with being able to sign up for classes. So if there's a teacher that you really want, for English classes, there's going to be a lot of different options, but if it's a specific teacher that you want, or if it's a class you want to take with a friend, something like that, especially if it's a class where maybe there's not a lot of these courses offered, which isn't going to be as big of a problem in English, but in other places it could be. It's really important that you try to register as quick as you can, because once you get that registration in, then you're going to be able to, as quick as your priority is, have priority over other people, especially if there's new students, right? After priority registration, If the campus is now open up to open registration, then you're going to be applying against all sorts of other people who are just, new to Solano College. You don't have that registration priority anymore. Any questions at all about registration priority? Just, you can unmute your mic or go ahead and unmute if you want to. Okay, it doesn't look like it. So I'm just going to show you really quick then the difference between the English classes that you'll be able to sign up for the spring semester. So I'm going to go to just Solano's main page again. And then once I'm in Solano's main page, we're just going to look at the class schedule. And there's going to be 2 options for classes for the fall semester. What's going on here? Safari's being weird. There we go. So there's going to be 2 options for after English 1. And those 2 options are English 2 and English 4. And so they're a little bit different from each other. They're both meet the very similar requirement as far as critical thinking advanced composition course. But one of them, and you can see the difference between these 2 classes, this class here, English 2, this is a critical thinking class that's going to focus on literature. So that means that the essays that you're going to write and the critical reading that you're going to do is going to be focused on utilizing lit, right? So in this class, you'd be reading, short stories, poetry. You might read a novel in this class. You might read, depending on the teacher, like a play, things like that. So it's all about reading literature as a way to analyze literature, dive deep into the ideas that the writers are exploring, critically read through them, and then form your own arguments on what you think something is about, and practicing those critical thinking skills using literature to do that. So for example, on the semesters that I'm teaching English 2, in my class, we read a lot of short stories in that class. I use a graphic novel in that class. We read some drama in that class. We read last semester, we used Shakespeare's Hamlet. So it really depends on the different instructors, but all of us are using lit as a way to critically read and to write critical essays. So if that sounds interesting to you, I think it's one of those things that it really just, at first when I remember taking English 2, I was like, oh, I don't feel like analyzing literature is something that I'm good at. But this is introduction to that class. It was a really awesome class because it gave me an opportunity to build a set of skills that I didn't feel like I had beforehand, or kind of explore something that was really new to me, right? It was the first time that I read a Shakespeare play and I really, really loved it. And it was something that I thought that I absolutely would not, right? It exposed me to a lot of different writers. I got to read some really awesome short stories. I got to read, read some poetry for the first time and really analyze it, and kind of got me thinking about things in a way that I hadn't before. So that's really what English 2 is about. Again, it's similar to English 4 because they're both critical thinking classes, but this one focuses all on using literature as a means to dive into that. And you can see all sections of English 2 and English 4, just like all of our English classes, are going to be online for the spring semester. English 4 is similar to what we're doing in English 1, just a more in-depth version of that, meaning that it's a critical thinking and composition course, but it's done using nonfiction. So a lot of the kind of stuff that maybe we've been exploring, like thinking about, things like bias, the impact of the language, environment, things like that, all of that kind of stuff, it comes out in English 4 classes. So for example, in the semesters where I teach English 4, and similar to some of my colleagues who are teaching English 4, to explore issues in like education, social class. I've explored, kind of diving into understanding biases, understanding how rhetoric is used to build arguments, logic, creating logical fallacies, like meaning what happens when people are creating mistakes in the way that they make their arguments. So it's really focusing at like how we effectively build argument using critical reading and writing skills to kind of evaluate not just the argument that people are presenting, but the strength of the argument that people are presenting. So again, both of these classes meet that critical thinking requirement. The only difference is between 2 and 4. Our number system is a little confusing, where it seems like first you take 2 and then you take 4. That's not true. You take whatever one of those 2 kind of appeals to you. If you want to focus on the literature element of it, then it's English 2. If you want to do the nonfiction element and kind of diving in more of like some of the like thinking about how argument is formed, then it's English 4. Any questions at all about the differences between English 2 and English 4? All right, cool. So I'm going to now go over and we're going to look at essay prompt for number 3, and then we're going to talk about the research project a little bit. Okay, so just on Canvas, when you look at this week's module, you'll be able to see where I opened up the essay prompt for number 3. We're going to be working on this third essay throughout this week and into next week, and I'll post due dates and everything in the upcoming module. So essay 3 is going to focus on, we've kind of been thinking about some different topics that are in Born a Crime. And Born a Crime is going to be the main source. And in addition to that, if you wanted to use any of the other articles that we've read over this unit or throughout this semester to help build your argument, then absolutely, like, you can bring that in. And if you want to use just evidence from Born a Crime, that's fine too, right? So essay 3 is going to give you some different options of where to go to be able to kind of explore some of these ideas that were brought up in Born a Crime as far as a few different topics. So I have 3 different essay prompts that you can focus through. Essay prompt number 1 is Trevor Noah argues that one's dreams and ambitions can be limited by the environment where he or she lives. So focusing on Noah and or other people in this novel, explore the impact that environment has had on one's sense of self. Were people in this book limited or controlled by their surroundings? And make sure you cite specific evidence to support your essay. So one of the things that we talked about is like really kind of exploring this idea of environment and how people are impacted by the environments that they live in, right? And that was evident in the reading that we focused on housing, right? And then the discussion board that we had. But specifically looking at it through Trevor Noah's book, you can see that there's massive changes in his life throughout the different places that he's lived, right? He pays very specific attention to what environment is like, where people are allowed to live. And we see the similar thing happen in the Bay Area with, we looked at it in History of Exclusion, but we also see throughout his novel or throughout his book about different places where he talks about like how he, living in different environments shaped him, right? And so this first essay prompt really gives you a kind of option to be able to explore that. Do we think people are limited by their surroundings? Are they controlled by their environment? How important is the environment that you live in to the influence that it has on your identity? And so really that's what that first essay is going to be focusing on, right? And so that'll give you some options to be able to explore that using his evidence, using evidence from your own experiences, other things you've read, things that you've experienced to be able to back up that claim. Any questions at all about essay prompt number 1? Remember, your microphones were muted just because you have a little bit of background, but just unmute if you have any questions at all. And you can leave them unmuted if I just didn't want that background noise to interfere too much, just because I'm recording for other people in the class who weren't able to make it today.
I think it's straightforward.
Okay, cool. So number 2, it says, because of his mixed ethnicity, Noah calls himself a cultural chameleon, right? That's like one of the things that he talks about. And then he also expresses on page 140 of his book that he's always an outsider, right? That he's always kind of in this place of like never quite feeling like he fits in, right? He blends, and he talks about that as like a real strength, right? Like we know that he's able to speak multiple languages, he's able to fit it in multiple contexts. But then he also kind of talks about this idea where he always feels like an outsider. So the question that I have for essay prompt number 2 is, how was Noah impacted by being one of the few mixed people growing up in an extremely polarized, which is that extremely kind of like either you're black or you're white environment? So really thinking about this idea of how did that feeling of being in between in a context, especially during apartheid, right, where everything was very homogenous, right, where it's like everything was either separated into black or into white. It was polarized. It was different. What was it like for him growing up as a mixed person in that context? Do you think this had any kind of positive or negative influence on him? It's really up to you. It could be move on to the elements that he thinks were positive in his life the elements that he thinks were negative in his life, or you could have a perspective on focusing on both, and make sure that you cite specific evidence to be able to support your claims. So in this essay prompt, I imagine you would move into focusing on ideas of specific identity based on maybe what he looks like. So skin color has a massive element there. We can see that he was treated differently, not just by his family members, but by other people around him based off of just his skin color, right? We could also explore ideas related to language in here, thinking about how Noah was able to navigate through his environment, speaking multiple different languages, utilizing those different languages different times as tools to help him fit into different situations. There's a lot of different things that he did, right? Like music became really important. He became, you know, the kind of person that was able to like start to sell things around and find like these different areas where he was able to fit in and kind of jump from group to group to group. And so I want you to kind of, if you're approaching essay prompt number 2, really think about like, how was he able to do that? And how did that influence his identity, either in a positive, a negative way, or both? Any questions about the second essay prompt?
No.
No.
So essay prompt number 3. In chapter 5, Noah defines this idea of the black tax, right? And he talks about how people in South Africa of the time were hindered, right? That specifically Black people in South Africa's progression was limited because the idea of the black tax, as he calls it, was constantly feeling like you're having to work to help the people who came before you, right? So he talks about that they spend all of their time and all of their energy trying to bring everyone else behind them back up to zero, so they weren't able to progress, right? And that idea is brought up on page 66. So after his mother is shot, right, Trevor Noah states that his mother's greatest fear that he would end up paying the black tax and get trapped in a cycle of poverty and violence, right? And so that was the biggest thing that his mom was afraid of. And she has that conversation with him, and he has that realization that on 279, that she's worried that he's going to get stuck in that environment, that he's not going to be able to break free of that cycle, right? And so the question that I have for number 3 is really paying attention to this idea of family and thinking about how did Noah's mother work to ensure that her fear would not become a reality. So as that she's kind of, you know, put into that situation where she's, you know, reflecting on her life and what her biggest fear is telling him that I didn't want you to be swept up in this world and get stuck into this kind of vicious cycle of poverty and violence that happens to so many people in that context. So what did she do to be able to break free of that being his reality? How did close relationships that Noah had throughout his life impact him? You can focus on just the relationship with his mom. You could focus on the relationship he had with other people around him. But specifically, how was he impacted by those relationships around him to make sure that that reality that his mom feared was not the one that he succumbed to? Does that third essay prompt make sense, or do you have any questions about that?
Makes sense.
Cool. So just like before, right, big thing is we're making sure that we're building on our evidence, right? That we're utilizing evidence from the reading to back up the claims that we're making. So make sure successful paper, like what is your argument? Body paragraphs, here's the point that I'm making throughout the body paragraphs. Here's the evidence that I'm using to support my claims. And specifically, the evidence is going to be coming from the text. But that idea of so what? Remember, we talked about that idea of like framing quotations, right? Like, what is the claim you're making? How does this quote that you're providing support this claim? And then adding that analysis, making sure the reader can see that clear connection between the point that you're providing and the evidence and the evidence that you gave to support that claim. So for this week, I think would be a really great place to start focusing on developing out this essay is making sure that you're picking an essay prompt that you're going to be focusing on, right? Developing out the thesis, what you want to argue related to this essay prompt, and then start diving into finding evidence from the book to be able to support that claim. It's kind of like that beginning of that brainstorming piece of it, right? What is it that I want to argue? What is the evidence that I'm planning on using from the book to create that argument? And then that's going to help start to, you know, give you your ideas that'll build your outline for your paper. And then from there, you know, if you have that by the end of this week, then next week you'll be really easy place to be able to move in and start putting these ideas together and developing out this essay. Any questions on essay prompt number 3? All right, so let's take a look at the research project. So I'm just going to hop back into this week's module. And then here's the prompt for the research project. So the research project is our final project, and let me share this on my screen really quick. The research project is our final assignment for this semester, right? All English 1 classes, there is a research project that you're going to be working on, and it's the largest thing that we do over the essay, and this will be due at the end of the semester. So I give this to you early so that you have time to break this thing up into chunks, right? And there's going to be some smaller assignments that are associated with the research project. The first one this week is just your proposal. And as we go on, I'm going to be introducing all of these things. So next week, I'm going to have a mini lesson that's going to focus on how to start working on the research. I'm going to talk about a source report and just kind of make sure that you're finding quality sources that you're going to be able to turn in and show me what sources you're going to use in your essay and how they're going to be working your essay. So the research project, again, I'm giving it to you a good while before it's due, because it's going to take a while to work through these pieces of this essay. And so this will be the last thing you'll turn in for the semester. And with the exception of finishing up the 3rd essay, everything that we're doing from here on out is all working towards having the research project done. So again, it's little chunks, little pieces at a time that we're going to be chipping away at this thing. So it doesn't feel like, hey, I give it to you a couple weeks before it's due, now get it all done, and it feels like this big overwhelming on-taking. Instead, it's little pieces at a time. We're going to work our way through this project. I'll be having a bunch of little assignments along the way to help chunk away at this thing. So I'll talk a little bit about what it is, and then kind of give you the chance to ask some questions. And then as we're moving through, again, next week, I'll introduce some more pieces of it, and we'll kind of keep on working on this throughout, in addition to that 3rd essay, throughout the semester, and that'll take us into the end of the semester. So the goal of the research project is for kind of, it's a culminating assignment, meaning that it's a bringing together the ideas of the skills that you learned in LR10, the writing skills that we've developed in our English 1 class, and be able to bring those together where you're writing a paper about a topic, an issue that's interesting to you. This is one of those places where over the course of the semester, we talked about this idea that your job is to build context for your reader so that your reader fully understands the issue that you're going to be exploring in your essay, because specifically in this research project, it's going to be something that you're becoming the expert on that I do not have a context for, right? These are readings that you're finding all your sources for your essay, you're writing about a topic that's interesting to you. And so it's really important that you're bringing your reader up to speed, because in the case of this project, like, I won't have the same context that I do for the other things that I'm assigning to read, because I haven't read the same things that you've read, right? So this is really an opportunity for you to pick something that's interesting to you, pick a topic that's interesting to you, a community that's interesting to you, and dive into something. And the options for this essay are really wide open. So here's a bit of a background. For this research project, you're going to identify a meaningful problem faced by people in your community and investigate the background and causes of the problem and learn about potential solutions in order to advocate for the best solution. So in a sense, this research project is all going to be about like problem and solution. And when I say your community, you're going to be able to define your community in any way you like. So for example, you might want to face a problem that's, research a problem that's faced by college students. And maybe specifically you can focus on community college students, right? Or you might want to focus on a geographic community. Maybe this could be your city or your neighborhood. Or it could focus on a cultural community. It could be based off of religion, ethnicity, gender identity, right? It's really up to you. But the point is you're thinking about a community and you're thinking about maybe a problem that people within that community could face. So for example, last semester, I had multiple students focus their research projects on immigrants. It was something that really stood out to them. Maybe their parents or themselves were immigrants from other country, and they wanted to think about what is a specific problem that immigrants in this country face. And so that was kind of the driving force behind their research. I had students focus their research project on one student focused specifically on he's a veteran and wanted to focus specifically on resources and the problems that veterans face as far as being able to find resources dealing with post-traumatic stress. And so that was something that was really important to him. He's works for the VA, wants to be a counselor to be able to help with substance abuse. And so he kind of brought together those two worlds and wrote a research project identifying a problem about addiction within veterans, and then explored different possible solutions as far as intervention services and developing out those resources. So really, this is one of those places where anything that stands out as interesting to you, it could be something that you're thinking about pursuing for a career, it could be something that's personal to you, right? But it's all about thinking about what is a community that you might want to focus on, and what is a problem that people within that community could be facing, and then how to be able to kind of think about what are possible solutions that I might dive into. I'm not asking you to understand those solutions right now. So like, let's say, for example, if I think about my community and I think about, I've lived in Fairfield, with the exception of when I moved away from college, I moved in Fairfield my whole life, right? And so one of the things that I see that's starting to change significantly in Fairfield, and specifically in the Bay Area, is, for example, homelessness, right? And I don't think there's an easy solution, and I don't pretend to know that I have any idea of what the solution is, but I see that there's an increasing problem. I see that there's an increasing number of people who are living on the streets. I was out riding my bike the other day, and I kind of took a bike path to ride over to my parents' end of town. And when I was there, I was like really, really surprised with the number of people that I saw living along the bike path. I rode my bike probably by at least 50 tents. There were people living back there. And I remember when I was a kid taking that bike path, riding out to Solano College, like not seeing that. And now there was just a shocking abundance of it. And so if I see something like that, I could say, maybe for this research project, I'm curious about that. And I want to find out, I want to identify the fact that I think that there's a problem as far as resources that are available, as far as housing that's available, as far as like outreach that's available. And I want to say, I'm just starting with that kind of curiosity. Here's a problem that I identified within the community, and now I'm curious about what are possible solutions for that. And that can be enough. And now I start to dive into researching, to start looking for articles to think about that issue. So next week, we're going to talk about how we find articles. We're going to look at some specific examples. But now for this week, and I'll show you the proposal in just a little while, I just want you thinking about what is a community that you might want to be thinking about, and what is a potential problem that you might want to be thinking about for your research project. Any questions at all so far?
No.
So your task then will be, you're going to be demonstrating that the problem that you selected exists by defining and analyzing the problem, and then find a solution, right? So you might want to, as you're researching, you might find 2 or 3 different solutions. And then through your research, you should be providing enough contextual information to show your readers that the problem that exists, who is affected and how they're affected. And then you're going to be finding evidence to convince your readers the problem is serious and worth attention, using credible evidence, right? We're going to talk about that next week as we're diving into our research, how to use those library databases that you utilized in LR10 to be able to find credible arguments and credible articles to be able to support the claims that you're creating. And then eventually you're going to be creating, your goal throughout this research project is to persuade your reader that your proposed solution is feasible or strong and better than other solutions. So basically, if I start going through and I'm researching homelessness and I'm researching different types of resources that could be available, maybe there's 2 or 3 different options. And through my research, I say, like, here is what I think the best possible solution to the problem is that I see within the community, right? But I don't know what that is until I start diving in and researching those different options. So again, next week, I'm going to have a mini lesson that's going to focus specifically on how to find different articles and we'll be looking at some different resources throughout there. I'm going to see if Atticus is available to come in and work on that with us, to be able to talk about some different resources and how to create, or how to start exploring those different articles to be able to create our arguments. Because right now your research project is just going to start from a general place of, I see that there's a problem and I have questions about this thing. And then I'm going to start to think about how to build those ideas from there. So here's some different kind of hints as far as we start writing this essay, which is still a little ways away, but to kind of start thinking about now, because our first step is going to be looking for articles and researching. So this is the largest essay that you've done over the course of this semester, right? So everything that we're doing is coming together right now. So we're going to have well-developed paragraphs throughout this essay. We're going to think about our organization, having a clear thesis statement throughout this essay, right? Introduction, we're presenting our thesis to our reader. Remember that thesis, we're making a stand throughout our essay, right? So make sure that we're dealing with a topic that is in some way, shape, or form, like this problem is controversial or debatable, right? We've talked about this idea of like finding counter argument, finding things that maybe you're going to find people who have differing viewpoints on this, right? Especially if I think about the example that I gave with homelessness, right? Like there's differing opinions on that. There's differing viewpoints on how to be able to approach that problem. Just like if we focus on the idea of immigration, there's a lot of debate around those types of issues. And where you find that debate, that's where you're going to be able to find places where making your stance or making your argument on something will have to be proven to your reader, right? Because you're picking topics that are kind of open for differing opinions within those ideas. So this essay will be about 5 pages or so. So you want to think that you're picking a topic that you're going to be able to open up and kind of explore from different avenues and different contexts, right? So you want to make sure that all of the claims that you're making, all the statements that you're making is going to be supported with evidence from your research. Don't assume that your reader automatically agrees with you. So you're making your claims. But remember, we talked about that idea. It's like, as we use outside sources, our claims are stronger by presenting different articles, different experts that agree with the claim that we're presenting. So it's like, here's this idea that I'm presenting with you, but the idea that I'm presenting you isn't just my own idea. It's supported by the evidence and the research that I've done leading up to writing this essay. So again, as we move into next week, after we put forth kind of like these proposals for the research project, the big thing that we're going to be doing is that we're going to be finding different articles, finding different sources to support our claims. So essays are going to be answering this question, so what, right? Why is your thesis important? And what is the consequence of the problem that we're exploring? So really that so what, like it's so important that we have that analysis throughout the essay. And again, between now and the time this is due, we'll be working exclusively on building these skills, right? Like exclusively on this research project and how to develop out these ideas. So here's one of the big things that I want to talk about is that this paper will cite at least 4 sources. So meaning your research project, it's going to be up to you to find the sources for this essay. I'm not providing any readings for this research project. Now I can, right? If you want to meet with me and say, hey, I'm thinking about researching, the impact that, I don't know, like expensive tuition has on college students. Do you have any ideas of resources that I could use? Sure, there might be things that I've read before, articles that I have access to, books that I have that I'm really happy to sit down with you and talk with you about different resources that you could use. If you're like exploring a lot of things education related, there's articles that I have. Maybe there's articles that I've been exposed to with different research projects that students have written over previous semesters. So when I say that I'm not providing you with sources, it doesn't mean that I can't provide you with sources or that I won't provide you with sources. It just means that you may be researching something that I'm not. In other words, other essays I've said, read these things and write an essay about these things. And this essay and this research project, it's going to be you're coming up with your topic and you're finding your sources. So please use me as a resource to help you be able to find sources. But the 3 sources you're going to be finding from are going to be coming from our different library databases. And I'll help you next week kind of think about how we're going to be able to find those and dig around and look for those things. In addition to the 3 library sources, you're going to be having a 4th source. And this can be any other source you want it to be. I want to leave this one pretty open to you. You can choose to have the fourth source be something from the library databases, but I also want to leave there to be an option for you to use, maybe even something that's multimedia, right? So for example, something could be really helpful is maybe using a documentary. For example, last semester, one of my students did a research project on the impact that socioeconomic status has on the quality of education schools or our children receive. So that was a problem they saw in their community, right? Is that they said, in my community, and we see this, right, in the cities that we live in, some schools are really nice, have really nice resources, other schools are not, right? And so that was a problem that this student identified, that they feel like school kids in our city have different access to quality of education depending on what neighborhood they live in. And so there's a documentary that the student watched that really shows that difference. It shows kids living in a very affluent area and the quality of school that they have access to versus kids living in a place where people live in poverty and the quality of access they have, education they have access to. So your fourth source, things you might want to be thinking about is maybe there's a documentary, maybe there's a podcast related to the topic that you're exploring. Maybe somebody did a TED talk on that. Maybe there's an interview that you found online. Maybe there's a book about it. I just want to leave that option for your fourth source really open, because I think that a lot of times, we talked about this idea of pathos, right? About a lot of emotion. Sometimes to be able to see something, if I'm writing a research project on homelessness, maybe reading articles kind of adds some piece of it, but it's missing that human element of it. If I watch a documentary about homelessness, if I listen to a podcast, or if I hear an interview from somebody who has experienced homelessness or is experiencing it, it could add a lot of emotion to my paper, or maybe a different dynamic than simply reading an article cannot. So you're going to have to use 3 sources minimum from the library databases, but the fourth source can be something like you watching a documentary, you listening to a podcast, etc., to be able to help add some different element to your paper. Any questions at all about the sources you'd be using in this paper? So again, next week, what we'll do is I'm going to have a full lesson on talking about how to find these sources, how to dive into this research. So this will be coming next week, but I just want to introduce this now to get you thinking about it. I'll let you read through the rest of this part later on, but the components of your research project, and we're going to be kind of announcing these different due dates, right? The research proposal is going to be due at the end of this week, and I'll go over that in just a second. But there's going to be some source reports, and I'll talk about those next week. We're going to be outlining this research project, and I'll talk about that in the upcoming next 2 weeks, and then the final draft, and that'll be due at the end of the semester. And I'll let you work pretty much up to like when finals week is on this, right? I'll have that due date right around then. And so you have this to be able to kind of look through to break down, but what I want to talk about now and show you is the research proposal, because these questions, the goal for this week is to start thinking about what might I want to write my research project about. That's as simple as the research proposal is. So I'm going to go over to Canvas and then I'll share this with you and we'll look at that together. Okay, so just under our module for this week, the only thing that's technically, like, there's things you're working on, but what's actually due to turn in is the research project proposal. And this is really simple. This is just you thinking about what you're going to write about for your research project, right? Again, your research project is not due until the end of the semester, right? But we're going to chip away at this thing. And that's the kind of the easiest way to go about, right? It's kind of like, I think about that like, I started running in January and I wasn't able to run, right? I could maybe run to like the corner of my block and then I would be completely out of breath. And if somebody were to say to me, hey, you're going to run 10 miles, I would be like, I would die before I would finish those 10 miles, right? But instead, if you chip away at it, right? If little at a time, little at a time, little at a time, eventually being able to do that large goal will be something that's manageable, right? So it was like little bit at a time. I said, you know what, this time I'm only going to run for 30 seconds. And then I'm going to do that again. Take a little break, do it again, do it again. And then eventually it was like, all right, I'm going to run for 2 or 3 minutes at a time. And then I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And now it's kind of gotten to the point over a longer period of time than, and I'm not equating this to being as difficult as spending months working on this research project, But over time, it got to the point where I was able to run for an hour or two, right, without stopping. And it was just like incremental, piece at a time, piece at a time. And I think that there's something really kind of powerful to that type of mindset about thinking about something, about working at it incrementally, right? Like chipping away at something. We're recognizing that the work that we're doing, it's a process. It's something that's ongoing. And our research project is that exact same way, right? Our work that we do in school, a lot of times, it's really helpful for me to keep that mindset that I'm just chipping away at work, right? Little at a time, setting these little goals for myself. So that throughout the research project, I'm going to be setting goals for you along the way. Little assignments that are due, that are all part of this larger good. It's all part of the research project, not individual assignments separate from the research project. But by doing these things, you're just working on that project in these weeks to come up to the end of the semester. So the first step of your research project is decide on a topic, right? Use these questions to guide your research proposal. This is only about a page or at the most of writing. You could write your answers right into Canvas. You could put it in a file and upload it to Canvas. It's totally up to you. But you're going to be giving me context for what you're thinking about working on for the rest of the semester on this research project. So if you have questions about how to do the research proposal after I talk through this, please let me know. I'll meet with you on Zoom. We can talk through it together. You can ask your questions now. But essentially, here's what you're going to be doing. It's just answering these 5 questions. 1, think about the community that you're thinking about analyzing as thoroughly as you can so somebody who's not a member of this community could understand it. What's it like to be a member of this community? How is the community viewed by the larger society? So maybe, for example, to that student who was writing about last semester about undocumented immigrants and resources that are available, they would just kind of talk about that community a little bit. Maybe if I'm thinking about writing about homelessness in the Bay Area, that I would give a little bit of a background. I would say, like, who's the member of the community I'm thinking about? What cities am I focusing on? Who are the members of the homeless community? Maybe people specifically, I had a student write about the LGBTQ community and how members of the LGBTQ community are more likely to experience homelessness than other teenagers who are not, right? So just kind of break down a little bit, like, who is the community you're interested in writing about, right? And just kind of giving a little bit of background on that. All this is one, and most importantly, it's helping you develop your ideas as you write your essay. But 2, it's helping give me a little bit of context. So when you're doing this research proposal, as I grade this, I'll just write back a quick little comment about, like, topic looks great, you're ready to start going. Or if you need kind of help, like, narrowing your topic a little bit, then in the comment section, I'll give you a little bit of feedback on this also. Number 2, what problem related to this community are you going to analyze? How does it impact the community you just described? So this is where you're identifying whatever the problem is that you're thinking about exploring, right? Number 3, what are all the other communities or people or groups that have an impact on this problem? So for example, if I'm focusing on the issue of homelessness, right? Maybe immediately the group that's impacted by this are the members of the community who are experiencing homelessness, right? The people who are actually living on the streets. I could say this is the group that's impacted, but maybe there are other groups that are impacted also. Maybe it could impact, people who are living in the city of Fairfield. Maybe it could impact, I don't know, children who are playing at the parks. Maybe it could impact, people who work in healthcare, right? I mean, maybe there could be other kind of, we think about that as like almost like a domino effect. Like if one person's impacted here, then there's a cause and effect relationship where somebody else is impacted over here. So I just kind of want you to think, like, are there other people who are impacted by this problem outside of the immediate people that you're focusing on? Next, where's your curiosity? So kind of like, it's important to go into this research project thinking about, there's a lot of things that I don't know about this. So for example, like, that's really the way that we explore researching, is that we dive into a topic and we're like, I really don't know much about this and I want to find out about this, right? This is something that like, for example, if you're exploring what kind of impact does social class have on the quality of education that people receive, well, there could be a little bit kind of thinking about question number 5, what we already know about this topic. There could be things you already know about this topic, but there could also be a lot of things that you're like, I really don't know, right? Are kids more likely to attend colleges? Are they more likely to finish certain degrees? Are they more likely to drop out? Are they more likely, right? Like, there could be a lot of things that's like, here's why I'm curious about this. Here's what I don't know, and here's what I want to find out. So there's no wrong answer to these questions, right? It's just like, why are you curious? What do you want to learn while you're doing this? Where do your interests lie? All of that kind of stuff. Like, what's driving your curiosity behind this topic? Maybe you want to tell me, this is what I'm thinking about pursuing for a career. This is something that I'm interested in, studying as a major in college. And then the last question is like, what do you already know about this topic or issue? Maybe this is something that's really close to you because it affects somebody in your family or it affects you personally. Maybe this is something you already know a good bit about and you want to just add some detail there. So again, all that this is going to do is really kind of help you flesh out your ideas to think about what you're doing for your research project. Any questions about this proposal at all? All right, so this is due at the end of this week. And then the other work for this week is to start working on essay number 3, right? Remember, developing out your thesis statement, focusing on thinking about what you're going to be arguing for essay number 3, and thinking about finding evidence in Noah's book to be able to support that. And then for the research proposal is just going through, and now it's just as simple as, what do I want to write about? Just kind of start thinking about this, and then this assignment is worth 10 points, right? It's a chance for me to see what you're going to be writing about. It's not a ton of writing, it's not a ton of work. It's just thinking about, this is what I'm going to be pursuing for my research project. And then for next week, what we'll do is we're going to start diving into talking about how to research for this paper, how to start fine-tuning out this proposal, looking for articles, and what to do with those once we find them.